All right, so here we are for the second of our Han lectures. And if you are curious as to what the Han lectures are, I encourage you to watch the first lecture because there's a fairly long explanation of what we're doing and why we're doing it here in the lecture by Tess Varner, which will be just before the lecture by Lee McBride on the YouTube channel. I encourage you to subscribe to that YouTube channel because it really helps the AIPCT, that's the American Institute of Philosophical and Cultural Thought, get out the message that we are trying to give to the world, and it's simply this. Humanistic thought and the study of the humanities is not dead, should not be dead, and must be continued into the future. That was why the AIPCT was founded. There were specific circumstances which you can read about if you go deep enough into our website that have to do with the creation of this institution. But that said, in a larger sense, the reason that we are here is because humanistic thinking, philosophical thinking, cultural thought, these things must find their way into the future. And so, with that said, that's part of what we're doing here at the Han Lectures. Now, this is the second of 3 lectures for this year's Han Lectures. And our presenter is Lee McBride, who is professor of philosophy at the College of Worcester, which has probably resisted the urge to call itself University of Worcester.
Oh, yeah.
I was about to say.
Yeah.
In Ohio, in Delaware, Ohio, which is a place I have actually been. It's nice.
It is.
Well, a nice town. And so, anyway, the College of Worcester is a venerable college of liberal arts, and Lee went there for his first appointment after he finished his PhD at Purdue. He has risen to, in the profession and also in his college, to becoming really one of the most important voices, both in American philosophy and in American liberal education during this time. He's the vice president of the Society for the Advancement of American Philosophy and is the incoming president of that notable society. I met Lee while he was still a graduate student, and I'm not going to say how long ago that was, but it's been a while. And I have been a witness to the development of his thinking, and he is an intellectual whom I respect just thoroughly around the board. One of the things I'm very interested in is that he is a man of very few words, in the sense that when you're in conversation, he pretty much slays with a phrase. And is always right on point with regard to what needs to be said, when it needs to be said, and in the most perspicuous manner. However, that is not his task today. His task is not to be few with words, but to be as liberal with words as he chooses. Erin McKenna, our featured and honoree for the Han Lectures this year, thought that Lee would bring both a critical, which I'm sure that's going to happen, a critical and an objective and a valuable perspective to bear on the history of her work and also the relevance of her work to the broader philosophical and cultural spectrum. And so with that said, I want you to make Lee McBride feel welcome.
So thank you. Thank you all for showing up. I wanted to thank Randy and Gabe for hosting us and taking such good care of us. I want to thank Erin McKenna for inviting me.
Thank you for coming.
Yeah. Okay, so the talk that I have today is titled Reimagining Our Bonds and Ties. If you know the band The Shins, there's a previous band called Flake Music, and this is snapped from one of their lyrics. But anyway, we're talking about Erin McKenna. Erin McKenna is a force of nature, a woman of great conviction. McKenna has spent decades articulating her own distinct vision of animal ethics. To be clear, this vision is pragmatist, it's feminist, and ecofeminist. McKenna's work forefronts the pragmatist frameworks of John Dewey, Jane Addams, and Elaine Locke, while incorporating disparate feminist figures such as Charlotte Perkins Gilman, Anna Julia Cooper, and Carol Adams. Additionally, McKenna intricately incorporates ecofeminist and eco-womanist theorists such as Val Plumwood, Laurie Gruen, Alice Walker, and A. Breeze Harper. McKenna has worked tirelessly to clearly articulate and champion a compelling view of feminist pragmatism. But it is McKenna's work on pragmatist, ecofeminist animal ethics that figures most prominently. There are 3 or 4 monographs on animal ethics. In Pets, People, and Pragmatism, McKenna worries about our relations and obligations to pets and domesticated animals, dogs, cats, and horses. Those animals often seen as part of the family. In Livestock, she worries about relations and obligations to livestock, those animals from whom modern human agriculture extracts labor, fertilizer, fuel, wool, leather, milk, eggs, and meat. In Living with Animals, that came out 2021, she draws upon literary touchstones such as Curious George, Babe, Moby Dick, and Charlotte's Web to help highlight the relations and obligations we have to domesticated and wild animals. Chimpanzees, pigs, whales, spiders. In her current project, I'm told, McKenna worries primarily about our relations and obligations to wild animals and the part they play in their place-specific ecosystems. In each of these works, McKenna suggests that the modern Western techno-industrial use of land and animal is morally shameful and ecologically unsustainable. It neglects the regenerative aspect of the ecosystem. It reduces animal beings to mere commodities. And it produces unnatural, wretched, stress-filled living conditions for far too many wild and domesticated animal beings. It is remarkable, I would say, that McKenna does this work with a reflective, open-minded, and non-absolutist fashion. While clearly committed to animal welfare and the liberation from needless suffering, McKenna does not defend an absolutist all-or-nothing view, such as Tom Regan's absolutist animal liberation or Tristram McPherson's ethical veganism. Rather, McKenna hopes to draw people into critical inquiry aimed at amelioration or making things better within a specific context. To this end, McKenna prods us to rethink our relationships, our connections to wild and domesticated animals. In the Task of Utopia, her first book, she articulates a process model of utopian thought, evoking utopian literature to distinguish this pragmatist feminist model from other models of utopia. In subsequent works, McKenna argues that there is a continuity between human beings and other living creatures, and that the careful understanding of the needs and predilections of these other creatures can help us to create ameliorative relationships with animals and the land. Hence, McKenna suggests that utopian visions and attentive perception into the lives of other living beings can help us to imagine new ameliorative ways to live with flora and fauna, to reimagine our bonds and ties. In this paper, I attempt to seize upon McKenna's pragmatist feminist utopian thought and tie this together with sharp-eyed ecofeminism, hoping to engage in the reimagining of bonds and ties that bring us into coincidence with other living organisms. The first section, pragmatism. McKenna is a pragmatist. This orientation bears certain features. First, it is anti-foundationalist. It rejects the postulating of an unquestionable, self-evident foundation. Second, this view is fallibilist. It recognizes that human beings are capable of error, mistake. Any belief could be revised or corrected. Third, The position embraces radical contingency. It rejects the idea that there is one ultimate plan or telos to the universe. It rejects the idea that history is preordained, determined. Fourth, the view recognizes the social character of both the self and human knowledge. It recognizes the limitations of isolated perspectives and narrow-minded or provincial intuitions. Knowledge is scientific in nature, relying upon efficaciousness, experimentation, replication, corroboration, and peer review. Fifth, the view is pluralist. It recognizes that there are multiple frameworks of knowledge and multiple traditions of valuation. In this iteration of pragmatism, it's not well suited to make absolutist claims that hold in all cases and scenarios. One might pause and think about the acerbic rebukes leveled by some animal rights activists. Pragmatism is antithetical to these types of absolutist claims that hold in all cases and scenarios. But pragmatism is well geared to survey a limited context, a situation, and make moral judgments, seek ameliorative guiding principles, and formulate respectful ways of negotiating a complex situated real life. Iterative inquiry and revaluation, fallibilism, and pluralism. McKenna makes use of John Dewey's naturalistic and evolutionary conception of the live creature. Here we find support for a viable animal ethics. Dewey maintains that human beings are the evolutionary result of a long sequence of organic adaptation. We're natural organisms, organic creatures struggling to maintain life. All living organisms are in constant interaction with an environment. Organic life takes place in and by means of an environment. And the interaction between organism and the environment is transactional. That is, organisms act and are acted upon in the world. Dewey writes, quote, "The world is full of things that are indifferent and even hostile to life," end quote. Life is maintained through the overcoming of these factors of conflict and opposition through adaptation. To prolong life, an organism must adjust, either by accommodation or by conquest. The avoidance of predatory animals and the consumption of food are just some adjustments. This ability to adjust and adjust to the environment is vital for, quote, "If the gap between the organism and environment is too wide, the creature dies," end quote. On this view, the world is a precarious place where organisms are continually called upon to endure disruption and opposition. Successful adjustment affords organisms temporary bouts of stability and equilibrium. This stability is secured when an organism shares in the ordered relations of its environment. Even still, organisms recurrently lose and reestablish equilibrium with their surroundings. But through successful adaptation, the life of the organism becomes high-powered and more significant. Dewey writes, quote, "In the process of living, attainment of a period of equilibrium is at the same time the initiation of a new relation to the environment, one that brings with it potency of new adjustments to be made through struggle," end quote. Each new adjustment contributes to the growth or the enlarging of the adaptive capabilities of the living creature. Growth is achieved when a temporary falling out is a transition to a more extensive balance of the energies of the organism with those of the conditions under which it lives. What is interesting here is that Dewey's account is meant to extend to all living organisms, from algae and oak trees to octopuses and primates. At bottom, there is continuity, synergism between living organisms. Human lives are physical. This is McKenna. Human lives are physically, socially, and culturally intertwined with other plant and animal life. End quote. Our continued life is bound up with other organic creatures and those natural environments we inhabit. This makes the view quite amenable to biocentric and ecocentric environmental views. We could, with Paul W. Taylor, advocate a biocentric view which recognizes our bonds and ties, our moral obligations to individual teleological centers of life. Bios, or life, becomes the central feature, buttressed by an ethic that rejects the notion that human beings are superior to other teleological living beings. Taylor argues that through unbiased or objective scientific study, we come to grasp the particularity of each organism as a teleological center of life, striving to realize its own good. As we become more familiar with wild teleological organisms and their behavior, we can come to see the world from their perspective and thereby recognize that the Earth's natural ecosystems are a complex web of interconnected elements, wherein each organism's sound biological functioning depends upon others' sound biological functioning. Alternatively, we could embrace Aldo Leopold's ecocentric land ethic. Here, the ecosystem becomes the central feature, and flora and fauna, water and rock are recognized as part of the smooth functioning of the cyclical biological land pyramid. Soil and sun give rise to plants. An insect layer rests upon a plant layer. A bird, fish, and rodent layer rests upon the insect layer, and so on up the pyramid until they reach the apex predators. Human beings and other omnivores fall somewhere in the middle. Here, cooperation and predation play parts in the land's capacity for self-renewal. We, human beings, must consciously study our local ecologies, noting our place within interconnected worlds. The biological community. An ethical relation to the land cannot exist without love, respect, and admiration for the land. Here I'll just mention that I believe McKenna tends toward the biocentric attempt to know and sympathetically understand individual animals and their needs. And I think I lean more pronouncedly toward the holistic ecocentrism, but I'll just leave it at that. In any case, McKenna's pragmatist approach situates human beings as complex transactional organic beings constantly altering and being altered by their environments. This allows for a continuum between human beings and all living beings, between the bacterium and the human. All the animal beings, wild and domesticated, require appropriate food and climate. Culture too. Clean air, water, care, and access to life-sustaining habitats. Yet our experimental and fallibilist inquiries into the transactive and evolutionary lives of other animal beings suggest that there are significant differences between the various species. Indeed, there seems to be a different bodily comportment in the world for each species. There are different needs and desires for each of the animal beings. There are responses, impulses, or perhaps emotions that work to restore the dynamic equilibrium of conditions that sustain life. These patterns of interaction and adaptation allows us to see the other animal beings are themselves moral agents, at least in regard to their relations or relationships with others of their own species and with their environment. As such, animal beings have species-specific behaviors, breed tendencies, and individual variations that need to be respected if we're to live responsibly in a biotic community. McKenna emphasizes the need for regular folks like us to rethink our relations to individual animal beings. Profit-driven agribusiness increasingly compels farmers and food producers to treat animals as resources or commodities, not as individuals with needs and desires. Within industrial animal production, notice how you slip into that talk of animal production, animal beings are seen as replaceable, resources to be harvested, units to be processed. They are beef, pork, not cow and pig. Carol Adams points out, mass terms and the absent referent are routinely deployed in food production and sales to cloak the violence and death inherent in meat eating, to keep our meat separate from any idea that that hunk of flesh was once an animal, to keep something from being seen as having been someone. In McKenna's work, we're compelled to consider possible ways of ameliorating our relationships with individual animal beings. We're compelled to think about the introverted fish, that is, the solitary fish, that is subjected to high levels of stress when it is farmed in high-density fish corrals. We are compelled to think about the calf's natural impulse to suckle at its mother's teat for comfort, and how these impulses are often denied in industrial animal production. We're compelled to think about the anus of the sheep, and the practice of removing the folds of skin around the sheep's anus to prevent fly strike. This insistence on recognizing the animal being as an individual does indeed draw our attention to the needs and desires and internal lives of these various creatures. It works against our cultural tendencies to treat these animal beings as mere units or replaceable commodities. It prods us to think creatively about our relationship with these animal beings. So, next section, it's titled Attentiveness, or On Being Perceptive. In a journal entry, December 1852, Thoreau asks, "What are 80 years and 10 hurriedly and coarsely lived to moments of divine leisure in which your life is incoincident with the life of the universe?" Here, Thoreau insists, we live too fast and coarsely. Far too many of us are eager to find lucrative work, to shoulder the harness, to enter the grind. We do not savor our food or the beauty of the living world around us. Thoreau suggests that we, in fact, may need to set aside time for divine loafing and communing with our ecological community if we hope to evade the crushing effects of business and money making, as well as the inadvertent destruction of the natural world. When was the last time you went for a walk? Just to go for a walk. How often do you take the time to notice the growth and decay of the organisms in your vicinity, the colors, sounds, and variations? Do you know the names of the flora and fauna in your local environment? Do you notice how the seasons unfurl? Are there smells and sounds particular to the seasons? Does it matter? Environmentally speaking, does it matter if you're observant of your ecological surroundings? McKenna's work leads me to embrace this Thoreauvian insight. We should take leisurely moments. Take out your AirPods and lift your eyes from the screen. Be present and observant to the natural world around you. Perhaps this is one way to discern environmental value. Perhaps this is a way to reimagine our bonds and ties with the land and the animals therein. So a little personal stuff. The baby hawks are back. Their piercing screams bleat out all day long. Let me explain. My house backs up to a creek, a densely wooded area that is designated city property. On the other side, my neighbor's backyard, there are lots of old trees that block the view of my neighbor's house. This gives my backyard a sealed-in feel. And along the end of my property, power lines are strung. A wooden utility pole sits in the back right corner of my yard. Well, these red-tailed hawks have established a nest in a tree behind my neighbor's house. This is at least the third year in a row. Once they leave the nest, the juvenile birds have taken to hanging out in my yard. I often see two hawks lounging in my yard. They're silly. Their feathers don't lie down properly. They're kind of, I think they look floofy. And they scream. I think they're hungry. They pounce. Like they sit and they pounce on things. And they scream. They stand in the grass. They pounce. There are early hunting skills being mastered. Grubs, worms, I don't know. They hang out on the rail of our deck. They sun their wings on our lawn, and they scream. Eventually, an elder hawk swoops through with a snake, a mouse, or a squirrel in one claw. The baby hawks go into a frenzy. Screams intensify. The elder parental hawk flies to the utility pole. That's the spot. And the baby hawks jockey to get there first. The kill is shared, sort of. The elder flies off. At this point, I often see 3 to 5 hawks at once. The baby hawks chasing after fresh kill. I have binoculars. I watch the dispatching of snakes, moles, rabbits. Through the month, the game gets larger and larger. It's quite a show. About 2 weeks ago, I was out in the yard gardening. 2 juvenile hawks out there, one in the grass, one on the power line. And I sensed another hawk, I don't know if it was sound or just the woof, over my head. An elder hawk swooshing in. The baby hawks started to scream. And as the elder hawk flew by, I could make out the tiny paws of what I hoped was a bunny rabbit. Tiny little paws dangling. But it could have been a kitten. The beauty, the power, the grace of the hawks, the timeliness of the moment. I share this to point out the ambiguity of the situation. I'm a cat person. My cat's in the house. Nevertheless, my heart sunk at the thought that the hawks were pulling apart a baby kitten. I spent lots of time watching the hawks, and I feel privileged that they frequent my yard. But my obvious bias in favor of cats should be acknowledged. It gives me pause. Perhaps one takeaway point is that that such relationships are messy and require time and reflective consideration. In this microcosm, each member of the community needs space. Each needs sustenance. If I want the hawks to return, I can do my part to provide them the space and hunting grounds the juveniles need to learn how to hunt and take care of themselves. I also better keep smaller, prized, domesticated animals under careful watch. I imagine similar accounts could be shared about the groundhogs that destroy my kale, the bats that frequent my root cellar, the wasps that routinely build nests under the handrail on my deck. This, of course, could be extended to the plants and organisms in my garden and down in the creek. This would require on my part time and attentiveness to specific traits and comportment of each of these living organisms. But this cannot be it. This sort of Thoreauvian momentary coincidence with that which is larger than us can't be the end of the story. I submit that efficacious change for better will require more than this. It will require a larger change in worldview and epistemology. It will require structural and institutional change. Next section, ecofeminism and the techno-industrial order of things. Ecofeminism is an environmental perspective that emerges largely as a critical reaction to the dominant Euro-descended, patriarchal, modern reductionist approach to science. Modern science is portrayed as universal, value-free, and objective. Modern, in this context, points to the period after the medieval period, circa the 15th through the 18th century, the Renaissance, Copernican Revolution, and Protestant Reformation, colonization of the New World, the Enlightenment, industrialization, etc. This dominant view of modern science is reductionist, mechanistic, and colonial projection of Western European man. While this modern science is portrayed as a liberating force for all human beings, it's actually ethnocentric and male-oriented, or patriarchal. Science is reductionist in at least two ways. First, through a logic of dualisms, modern science excluded other knowers and other ways of knowing. Women and indigenous people were seen as irrational, uncivilized, and underdeveloped. Second, modern science reduced biotic systems to inherent and fragmented material, inert and fragmented material, diminishing nature's capacity for regeneration and renewal. Modern science in this guise is mechanistic and analytical. The world and its parts were thought to be machines. In this manner, the workings of the natural world are mechanistic. Tendons and muscles, bones and elbow joints work together like pulleys and bands. We can manipulate them and maximize their potential. Additionally, if we analytically reduce natural objects to their simple operating parts, we can understand how these mechanisms work. We can cultivate and harness nature's power. Francis Bacon, he said something like, knowledge is power. Reinstating something like the great chain of being, this reductionist science situates bourgeois, Euro-descended men above women, beasts, and plant. As Val Plumwood makes clear, a logic of dualisms makes possible various forms of oppression. Men subordinate women, human beings subdue and plunder nature, rational industrious men colonize and or enslave indigenous peoples, the wealthy exploit the poor, etc. Hence, nature, women, and indigenous peoples were reduced to potential resources to be developed. And this allowed for grave violence against nature and women. Ecofeminism, in this guise, suggests that reductionist science, industrialization, and capitalist economics are part of the same logic, what we might call coloniality. According to this model, value is determined by the efficiency and profits accrued from the production and sales of commodities, and exploitation and plunder of labor and land are inherent to these practices. Those properties which preserve the integrity and stability of ecological processes, but are commercially non-profit making, are ignored and often destroyed. This distortion reduces forests to pulpwood, animals to meat and leather, women to, I'll let you fill that in. The goal in this modern techno-industrial order of things is to maximize productivity. Driven by profit motive, there's a clear preference for efficiency and maximization of production, industrialization, and agribusiness. Hence, our Western modes of agriculture tend toward monocultures and high-yield, highly mechanized agricultural production. As Vandana Shiva puts it, quote, the marginalization of women and the destruction of biodiversity go hand in hand, end quote. Reductionist science thereby violates and destroys the living diverse ecosystem It disrupts or destroys the organic rhythms and regenerative capacities of the biota. Violence and force are inherent to this modern scientific method. Maria Mies argues that without the colonization of the global south, without violently destroying natural ecosystems, without the imposition of categorical dichotomies, without reducing women to mere animal nature, the high caste Euro-descended man, the landed gentry, would not have risen as lord and master of nature, women, and the global south. The pervasive developmental paradigm of the West sees Euro-descended man as the measure of all value. Women and native indigenous people are depicted as different or other. This illustrates what Karen Warren calls the logic of domination, which says something like this. For any X and Y, if X is superior to Y, then X is justified in subordinating Y. This, of course, raises several questions about the criteria for superiority. Option 1, divine fiat, were men created in God's image, qua rational beings. Option 2, level of intelligence, are sentient creatures superior to non-sentient creatures? Option 3, physiological prowess, do some physical abilities mark a creature as superior to other creatures lacking said abilities? I'm sure there are other additional options. In any case, by the logic of domination, if we can establish that human beings are superior to dogs, then human beings are justified in subordinating dogs. Notice that we have a long history of seeking and maintaining sex-based ethnic and racial hierarchies. For the first century of the United States, the superiority of Euro-descended landed gentry was codified and maintained. Afro-descended people, indigenous peoples, and women were not full persons. But it's important to note that the ecofeminist is not simply rejecting science or the scientific approach to knowledge acquisition. Ecofeminists work to articulate a new approach to science, de novo, or anew. As Maria Mies puts it, the marriage between knowledge and force must be dissolved. It is imperative to alter this science. Another paradigm of science cannot start, however, with the famous male urge for limitless knowledge, omniscience, and omnipotency, end quote. A new worldview is required, bearing new relationships based on something other than domination or plunder, subject to subject reciprocity, and recognition that the earth and its resources are limited. And I think this is the last section. The last section is titled Reimagining a Future. Far too often, we are led to believe that there is no other alternative, that we are bound to this planetary, ecologically extended, increasingly techno-automated, thereby job-destroying, post-industrial, yet no less fossil fuel-driven, thereby climate-destabilizing, free market capitalist economic system in its now extremely neoliberal, transnational, technocratic configuration. That was Sylvia Wynter, by the way. As Sylvia Wynter tells us, we need to reject the Euro-descended bourgeois approach to science and the attending imperative supraordinate telos of increasing capital accumulation. So it's following up on all the things you heard in Shiva and Mies, that there's this need for something new. But what will this new worldview look like? What are the bonds and ties that hold us in harmonious equilibrium with the natural world? It seems that we need imagination. We need poetic knowledge and utopian thinking. We need conceptual tools and heuristics that can help us to imagine that which is not readily visible or conceivable. Levers that help us to imagine a better future with less subjection, less degradation. How fortunate we are that McKenna also wrote a book on utopian thinking. In Task of Utopia, McKenna outlines 3 distinct conceptions of utopia. There is an end-state model, an anarchist model, and a process model. The end-state model sets as its goal one fixed end state, one set of values, one conception of perfection. Visions of homogeneous totalitarian regimes arise. The idealized end is often maintained and policed. It's maintained and policed under threat of violence. Citizens often become indifferent to the means used to maintain right and venerable order of things. In contrast, the anarchist model focuses on severing the connections to the past institutions, value system, and habitual modes of conduct. Personal liberty, freedom from governmental bureaucracy, fascists, and the trappings of neoliberal simulacra. Visions of spontaneous and complete revolution arise. Small-scale communes, self-determination, the queering of sexuality. While this view allows for maximal difference and freedom, it does not and cannot propose or work to maintain one shared ideal vision. If everyone has the freedom to live out their desires and personal visions, it would seem that this model cannot secure the safety and liberty of all. McKenna suggests that this model lacks the conditions that would make shared deliberation and cooperative planning possible, and thus remains indefinitely threatening and chaotic. The third model, the process model, trades in Deweyan and pragmatist ideals. Visions of democracy, critical intelligence, and experiments in living arise. The utopian end is postulated as an end-to-end view, an interim target or goal that arises through free and open inquiry, always subject to critique and revision. Importantly, the process model acknowledges the need to establish social conditions under which open and flexible citizens who respect differences can be trained. There's a need to develop, quote, individuals committed to the method of intelligence, observation, reflection, judgment, and vision, end quote. McKenna writes, the process model of utopia takes into account the connectedness of the world and the lived creatures in it. It postulates multiple possibilities for the future rather than a final static, homogeneous end state, and seeks to sustain a critical, flexible, and open-minded citizenry. As such, the process model allows for multiple possibilities. It does not propose fixed and final ends or manipulate people into homogeneity. This model can help us understand, cope with, and transform our current situatedness. It can move experience forward in a satisfying and fulfilling way for those willing to remain critical, flexible, and open-minded. And here's a long quote. What we choose to pursue now defines what we will be able to pursue in the future. On this model, we must accept responsibility for creating the future and develop a critical method of directing it and not wait for it to simply unfold. We need to see life and our visions of what could be possible as an experimental process, an experimental coping with conflict and difficulties. Rather than seek perfection, the process model of utopia seeks to create and sustain people willing to take on responsibility and participate in directing their present toward a better, more desirable future. We need to continue to try. We must have hope and remain active agents in forming a future. We must take on the task of utopia, end quote. We must take on this task. We must reimagine our ties and bonds with animal beings and the land. Notice, more than attentiveness in interpersonal relationships or relations is needed. Utopian thinking proposed by McKenna then will involve particular democratic notions and educational institutions. The proposed utopian thinking will be pluralist and fallibilist. I agree with McKenna. We could reimagine those bonds and ties that bring us into coincidence with the natural world. Thank you.
Please feel free to field your own questions.
Got it.
So, go to y'all. By the way, the cat is in.
Dude, I almost lost it.
Eating, but I have a feeling she'll join us shortly because this cat is not shy. Does the cat have questions? She does.
She was leery of me, I know.
I got one for you.
Dr. Barner.
Okay. So, thank you. I really love this. It's beautiful. I'm really interested in the kind of relationship to the poetic knowledge and the utopian thinking. And as I've been thinking about the utopian thinking, it's very action oriented, revising, experimenting, collaborating, dialogue, etc. And then we have this other element that's the divine loafing. And I hear you saying, especially toward the end, that that's not sufficient, the attentive listening.
Yeah.
But what role do you think it does play? Like where does it fit in the process? And the second part of the question is, I feel sometimes like my divine loafing, while it is closely related to, I think, the actions I also take, it feels like a privileged act to sit, especially when I'm talking about traveling, to sit back and watch and observe. Those are the things on my mind.
Thank you. So where does the divine loafing or the moments of, what does that do and why is it in there? I think these are some of the most personal bonds we have and connections we have with nature. You have to actually know what you're dealing with. You actually have to. And I've done this, I did it just last semester with my students. I assigned them to go for a walk and put all your cell phones and take all of this and just go and walk and describe what you encounter. And a lot of them had weird experiences. They were like, the wind was interesting, or the way leaves actually look, or do it yourself, try it. There are things that are probably all around you miss because we're so caught up in getting to the next thing, or to checking your phone, or streaming something live, than just going out and experiencing the natural things all around us. So I think that's one way of getting people to actually open up and reconsider those relationships, right? Like, I love these hawks, but they're assholes. I mean, they're really loud, and they're ripping apart little fuzzy animals daily. But that's nature, and that's what, if you're gonna recognize their majesty and their power, that's what they do. So I see this sort of work of the divine sort of moments of trying to connect as entry points for people to maybe have a reason to want to fight to change the larger institutions, to actually want to engage in what we're after. If we want to change the institution, if we want to make the world a better place for animals, for even our ecosystem. Why, right? Unless the younger generations, unless these people actually have some real connection to these places and these things. And I'm loving this.
I told you.
what was the second question?
The sense that it is a point of privilege to be able to divinely loaf.
Yeah. So this I see too, and I've been asked this before. Isn't the case that only super wealthy people or people who are super comfortable in their situation have the time in a yard like mine where you can just sit out and sort of engage with all these little creatures? Yes. But, notice I didn't say go to Yellowstone and go hang out there or fly to France and, and that's where you really get nature. I'm saying go in your backyard and hang out and open your eyes, look up. And I think, between your walk and your commute, you might actually see some things. You might actually see what's going on with the plants and the shrubs and the trees in your neighborhood. That's good. And so the larger, I add on to this that a whole ecofeminist side, because I think it's important that we don't forget that our whole society is wrapped up in all these other things that keep us acting the same ways, prodding us to live in certain fashions, to establish and keep hierarchies, which probably are going to exploit some animals and some groups of people who we think of as commodities. Mm-hmm. Yes?
I had a question about, I really liked how you said that in order to be able to take on some of these obligations and to perform them, we have to learn to see from the perspectives of these other creatures.
Yeah.
And that's something that I've been trying to experiment with, in my own life, just trying to understand, like, how is the world viewed by the different things that are around me. So, with beekeeping, for example, I've been reading all these bee books lately.
Right.
And, it's like bees can't see red, but they can see ultraviolet, and they can see polarized light, so they can literally see light waves that we can't,
Yep.
And so can a lot of other insects and birds. Or like there's this one really good book that Robin Wall Kimmerer wrote about moss, where she's this biologist and she's talking about like trying to see like a moss to understand how it reproduces itself, right?
Yeah.
And so it's just really exciting to think about how is all of this perceived. I forget who it was that I was reading the other day, but it was this idea that like the world that we see isn't the world, it's the world as filtered through the human consciousness, right? And so I'm just curious as to, what your take is on how to engage in that exercise, how to pursue that sort of understanding so that you can be in a relationship in that sort of way.
Yeah, so I brought up some of Paul W. Taylor's work, and he actually, it seems like, thinks that we get there, that we're actually seeing the world through the eyes of that animal. And I think that's too far, personally. I think the pragmatist in me, anyone who is a pragmatist, would have the strong sense that science isn't going to get you all the way there. And we have to continue to recognize it's always going to be from our perspective, from our view. And but I think we can learn lots and lots. And I think we actually, as philosophers, we need to listen to what the biologists and these other folks what they're doing, and psychologists. They can tell us about our own perception, and how we misperceive things, or all the biases that we often just take up. So I would say I am not afraid of science, and I think we should use science. I think the social sciences and the natural sciences can be very helpful for us to understand and to try and connect with these other beings. But I wouldn't go as far as the Taylor that I pointed out, to say that somehow if you get rid of all your biases and you just study like a real scientist, that you get to see like the world from a moss's perspective or mushrooms or something like that. But I think there's new studies that are giving us really interesting and fascinating information. And I think it's just, you have to keep criticizing, thinking through it. What's the best information we have at this point? And I think one of the problems is a lot of the mass population just doesn't engage in any of that. Right? That's just, why do I care unless I can eat it or I get money from it? That's unfortunate. Randy? We passed it?
I was only going to, I do have what I would regard as not particularly easy question. I'm inspired by your hawk story, right? But here's the thing. It's in your backyard.
Yep.
And so there's a structural issue with regard to eco-observation, right? Which is to say, those hawks have adapted to your observing them in a way that you probably hadn't anticipated.
Yeah.
Which is, I'm not suggesting that they know that you're observing. I'm saying it's what's left over for them. Sort of
Sure.
given the way things are. Now, analogy. In order to walk through my front door right there, you have to move a wooden object that has attached to it Dorothy's ruby slippers.
Oh.
I don't know if you saw them.
No.
You have to say you have no choice. There's no place like home. Questions about home. Moving story. Whose home is it?
Oh. Okay. That's good.
I really love your story, but
Yeah.
whose home is it?
Yeah. So the story's told from my perspective, right? This is me sharing my view of it. So the part of it that I find fascinating with this whole thing is that Erin McKenna has been doing so much work on the things that are close to her. So the animals, the dogs, the horses. But you have gone out and done the wild stuff. And that line between wild and domestic is a really interesting and fascinating thing. And I think it lies behind your question. Paul Taylor has this idea that when he's talking, he's only talking about the wild ones. The ones that have been domesticated, their teleologies have been they've been destroyed already.
Distinction.
So this is where I would go, is that I don't make those hawks come and go to that tree, and I don't make them hang out in my yard either. I couldn't. I feel like they've chosen to use this, and I feel privileged that they actually do that. But so you're asking, but whose home is it? I don't know. I mean, from one perspective, I go in and I go sleep in my house, which is attached to it. They go up to their nest and they hang out there. The juvenile hawks are learning how to hunt all throughout the back trees there. I don't go up there. But if you're saying something about human development and what it does to populations of hawks, I'm guessing it has totally changed and altered what they can do and where they will do it. But the idea that we can somehow both at the edge of my yard sort of hang out, and they have their freedom to come and go.
With their kittens.
Yeah. And so
Okay.
I'm not I'm not trying to say that they shouldn't.
Are you sure that there's no pair of slippers over the door for them? I mean, the analogy is simple. It's your home. They are guests.
I wouldn't go there.
Or is it their home and you're the guest?
So I don't know if anyone gets to claim like that. I think we're all organisms fighting, right? That's the continuity thing. That
it seemed much nicer than that when you talked about it.
Yeah, that's because I love cats. But I understand.
All right.
Yeah. Wait, I'm sorry. You had a hand, and then we'll go to you next. I'm sorry.
There's a view taken seriously by some important animal ethicists that we should non-violently drive all the predators to extinction.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And your hawk story made me think about this.
Yeah.
Now, I find it equally unintuitive, let's say,
Yeah.
as you do.
Yeah.
But I wonder if this sort of way of thinking about things that you're presenting helps diagnose what's gone wrong with that kind of view. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think McKenna takes us to Val Plumwood that wants to resituate human beings in the cycle of death and life, right? That all of us are going to engage in death, even the vegans. When they try to produce whatever they're going to eat, whenever they try to live somewhere, they're going to disturb, they're going to kill. And so one of the things I think that I appreciate about McKenna's work is that she's not advocating, well, it doesn't matter, right? Just do whatever you want. But she's saying, even those who are, patting themselves on the back and saying, I have refrained from all of this, and that they engage in life and death. They kill things too. We all are. And to put that back into our faces and make us recognize that is, I think, a healthy thing. And I think that's sort of what you were asking is, there seems like we've gone wrong if we're like, just go and wipe out the predators, right? Yeah, that just seems so wrong, especially if you understand ecosystems and the good the apex predators do for systems. Yeah. Did that get at it?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I was just going to go back to the idea of trying to emotionally connect to nature or take it in,
Mm-hmm.
and that being a motivating factor to save it. And,
Sure.
That's not the right word for it, but that's what humans have been trying to do and think that we have the ability to do by
Yeah.
managing it in different ways and changing the way we address these issues.
Yeah.
But that my personal experience of trying to go out and connect with the natural world just brings about feelings of guilt and shame for being human, for our presence here,
Yeah.
for being a part of this,
Yeah.
horrible crime of existence.
Yeah.
In what is, like you're saying, not necessarily our home.
Yeah.
But we've treated it that way.
Mhm.
And now we're trying to keep it the way we like it, full of diversity and life. And,
Right.
it's becoming such an overwhelming task that how can one even
That's right.
experience one moment of, joy in it when there's the constant preoccupation that you're supposed to be saving it.
Yeah.
And that we really don't have any idea how to do that, and participation in and of itself may just continue to destroy it, that we haven't really figured out how to manage any of it. And even to be walking out on a trail, at the state park or in the wilderness, you are wearing that trail out. I mean, you're participating in an interaction with nature, and we're not really sure the extent of which that's going to impact.
Mhm.
And it doesn't feel like a huge thing when it's just you out in the wilderness taking it in. And
Mhm.
maybe you're moved enough to do something really big and real.
Yeah.
Or maybe you're just adding another set of tracks and the water's going to erode it faster now.
Yeah.
How do you contend with that dichotomy between trying to develop a personal connection to it and then just feeling so hopeless and ashamed of being human that you can't even get motivated to do anything?
So what comes to my mind immediately are questions. I mean, so one of the things that comes out of the types of concerns you're raising is, should the human population be getting bigger, or should we try and scale back in our human population? So deep ecologists have made the claim we actually actively need to try and be smaller in population. Now, how do we get there? It's usually a scary sort of notion. But there are ways, and when folks have made arguments about stop having kids, right?
But they also
Maybe-
make ones about compassion. Sorry to interrupt, but the idea of being more compassionate toward one another is, it fosters love and human connection, which isn't exactly helpful for population control.
Yeah, but if I have a bunch of children and they live in the ways of the modern West. They're consuming resources at a level far beyond all the other places in the global South. And so, I mean, one of the most important things we potentially could do is to stop and ask ourselves, should we be contributing to that sort of thing? Yeah, I mean, and so how do I deal with it? I mean, I think the world is paradoxical, and I do acknowledge that there is a bunch of messed up things, and I do think humans have messed up a lot. I mean, so I have a bit of work on an insurrectionist change, a large change in our thinking and the ways that we attach ourselves to other people and institutions. And so there's, I think, a sense of we have to be able to live our lives and continue the fight, the struggle. And so those little moments might be really important and helpful. But it's not like a salve that, you know, I can feel good forever, or that you know, I don't also feel crappy for, you know, having a house
with hawks.
with hawks. Yes.
I think I have more a comment than a question.
Okay.
But it just is getting off of what you were just saying and yourself. You made the comment about, you know, what interaction or impact do we have in simply walking down a path in nature? What is with that? And you're talking about, or mentioned deep ecology, and I personally haven't read Erin McKenna's books that you're all trying to pick apart and discuss, but I have done work in the past points in my life having to do with issues of conservation and development in different places in the world, here in Africa, in a Native American location, Southwest, looking at it in some other context in Central and South America. And I would just ask, well, who gets to interact with nature?
Mm-hmm.
And you're bringing up the population point of view, but who gets to make the decision about population?
Yeah.
And the woman before you and yourself maybe made a single use of the word neoliberalism, and that has a juxtaposition against things like fascism. And I do remember 3 decades ago, I was maybe trying to reckon with what deep ecologists were saying, Murray Bookchin, at that point in time, and thinking, okay, if his version of how to do ecology in the world worked out, that has massive implications for how my Malagasy cultivators are going to be allowed to be in their context when they've had a total history of escaping slavery and essentially going and living off the grid in the woods to be. And yet you've had France try to extract a lot of resources off their country and many others were similar colonial situations all over the globe. And you talk about an utopia, and that's what everybody, you know, maybe is trying to make little pieces of in the development around the globe. How does this all interact? Who gets to make the decision on what is the little utopia? And that is this awful struggle that we have between the WASP men, between different indigenous groups, and which one, or women and men, or you name whichever your favorite category of
Sure.
hanging out with is.
Yeah,
I'm
no.
not quite sure we're really dealing with it in a good way. I mean, currently we're watching the U.S. interact with Ukraine and Russia,
Mhm.
while I've had the vantage point of being down in Nicaragua
Yeah.
a couple times the last year and a half,
Mhm.
and seeing a different take on that picture, where
Sure.
it's like, okay, they maybe tend more towards Russia, but not entirely.
Mhm.
And we're trying to demonize that in our election process and our grappling with resources and
Yeah.
around the world. So how do we all get to exist, or coexist with the natural world around us?
Yeah, I mean,
I don't know, I mean,
yeah, I mean, so the point in my talk where I get to some of that is this when I bring up the ecofeminism and at least the folks that I reference, they're taking it back to colonization and how colonization spread around the globe, and there's certain groups of people who were empowered and who did get land and property, and others did not have an opportunity, and that I think we still live in that debris of that, right? That if you look at who owns property, who has seats of power, it's still overwhelmingly Euro-descended men. And so we're still fighting that battle. And so I think you're right, that I think many of us in the United States don't really confront that, that that's really still right there. So how do we do it? It's going to take lots of work, and changing the way we think. I mean, what we see as normal has to change.
no, it strikes me that you've got people who are well-intended, trying to do their little piece. You have many other people who are just simply not grappling in it,
Yeah.
and are in maybe some kind of existential or narcissist dysfunction, and misidentifying a lot of what should be rectified.
I agree with you. I have a book for you.
And so, having been part of community groups or campaign activity, whether Randy's or other people's, it's interesting to figure out how you tweak at least a little bit that you feel like you can work on.
Yeah. Back there. Do you have a question still?
Oh, yeah, I was listening to that. In regards to going back to your phrase, which was, I don't know if I got it exactly right, the European, what is the phrase?
Euro-descended.
Euro-descended.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah. And just to keep it on ecofeminism, which I kind of feel like this may be completely wrong, is a subset of ecology, although I know that the group, they've had their differences, and you guys can speak about that later. I have a great appreciation for ecofeminism in the sense that I believe all of us, male or female, can have female sensibilities about the environment, our roles, how we interact. You know, it's a nurturing one, or if you're in your profession. For example, I was in a profession that is practically female dominated. I'm a landscape architect, but 58% of landscape architects are women. So I'm in the minority in that field. And I've experienced working with engineers, it's interesting, the oppression, sort of a masculine oppression against that nurturing sensitivity for how to do things, how to manipulate. I think there is this, we've imported through all of us, male and female, this European sense of the landed gentry. Let's have a lawn.
Yeah.
For what reason? Are we going to play lawn
Yeah.
games? No, we don't. We go out, we kill the moles,
That's right.
we decimate the soil and so forth. You all
Yeah.
know the drill. And but I think what it comes back to is we co-create. Humans are not this thing that don't create a path walking back and forth. We're not we have created the environment where we co-create the ecosystem.
Yeah.
We can either have that ecosystem be vibrant, healthy, or we can totally destroy it.
Mhm.
And I think that we just have to start asking questions. For example, how subtle and insidious is this idea of a lawn? It is a European idea.
Yeah.
It is a landed gentry idea.
Yeah.
But we perpetuate it.
Yeah, we do.
And we all do it, male or female, European or African, so, these
Yeah,
are things
yeah.
we do because we're brainwashed to it.
Mhm.
And I think it's great, we're all sitting around a discussion of these ideas, because that's what we gotta wake up to is,
Yep.
it's not the person that is totally against what we're talking about, it's ourselves
Yep.
that aren't enlightened to what we're doing.
Yep.
What drives it, where does the sense of aesthetics comes from, our sense of values. So,
No, I think
again,
that.
not really a question there, but
Yeah.
just to, when you say the phrase Euro descendant
Mhm.
and stuff, that is very powerful here in America, but now it's being transferred through the Western influence of Asia. China is now going to Africa and doing what we did,
Oh, sure.
and so forth. So it just keeps going
Yeah.
to each corner of the earth that hasn't been
Yeah.
colonized.
Yeah, no, I understand that, and so when I can, I try to make sure that the Western European goes in there. But I mean, what I'm trying to do, what I'm trying to capture there is the ideas of why are English, French, Spanish, Portuguese spoken in most places around the globe, right? The dominant languages. If you go to university, you're going to have to learn one of those languages, right? Why is that the case, right? It's tied to colonialism, right? And so I'm not saying colonialism didn't happen in other places. Like, it did, and it probably is. So I'm just trying to talk about the one that I'm familiar with, and probably the one that's globally dominant right now. And so, the French and English sort of thing is very, very powerful. And a lot of the cultural things that we take on from that tradition still just sort of, it's in our elementary school, it's in colleges, it's in our great classics, it's, if you're going to learn certain people, it's typically a string of white gentlemen. Still.
Having said that, let me just
Yeah.
maybe not push back, but just
Yeah.
reframe it a little bit.
Sure.
Do we pull back, like for example, Africa now is really in the crosshairs as far as resource rates. It's sort of the last place that hasn't, not the last place, but
It's been done.
it's in the crosshairs now in China. They're
Yeah.
developing it like great. They got their Belt and Road Initiative across.
Mhm.
And their model is not conducive to sort of the deep ecology, democratic institutions. Let's come up with a better way now through experience. It's more the exploitative European model that exploited the Americas. if you
Mhm.
will. So I wonder which one, do we pull back and just let them do that, or do we exert that power for good, if there is such a thing? I don't even know if.
So I wouldn't go with the arms race or the sort of like, we need to hurry up and get there first and
Yeah.
colonize it first, right? We need to get to the moon or Mars and colonize it first, right? I think that's part of the thing we need to challenge and build relationships with other beings, with other humans, and reconsider what we're up to. I don't know what to say about Africa. I don't want to see them be exploited. I don't want to see their resources being taken from them. But my thing wouldn't be immediately to head toward like we have to step in because that's the dominant way of doing it, right? That we need to police the world. We need to uphold something.
Well, there has been a pulling back, is all I'm saying.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot
Yeah.
of criticism that we pulled out and left sort of a thought vacuum, power vacuum.
Yeah.
And so this vacuum now, there's other power out there that's going in. And we ought to
Sure.
just keep that as part of the discussion.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, I had a question you had mentioned this idea of quote unquote animal production, and you talked about
Yeah.
CAFOs and
Mhm.
like mass animal feeding and concentrated operations. while you were talking about that and thinking about objectifying animals in this sort of way, one of the thoughts that came to me as I was reading this book by Gordo Cohen. He's an anthropologist up in Canada. He's done work down in the Amazon with a group of folks down there. And one of the indigenous languages there, when they go out into the bush to hunt, they refer to, and I could be missing some of the nuances here, it's been a while since I read it, but they refer to what they're going to hunt as meat. You know, it's like they're not going to hunt jaguar, they're not going to hunt, you know, tapir, they're going to hunt meat, right?
Okay.
So I'm thinking about these two forms of objectification of animals. One on this large industrial scale, one that's on a very local scale,
Yeah.
right? And then as I was thinking about those, I was thinking about my own experience going hunting with a friend a couple years ago. And obviously, if you know you're like a vegetarian, this is not even a discussion to be had, right? But for those of us who do eat meat, I'm thinking about what the process was of going out with him and what it was like to actually experience that, and seeing the deer being killed and what I felt and everything while that was going on. And I get why hunters have to think, in a way of like, oh, I'm going to go hunt meat, not just necessarily like I'm going to go hunt this like living creature, right?
Yeah.
Because if you're going to bring something back to your family, you have to have a certain mindset to be able to do that, I think. Or maybe not. I don't know. Maybe you can just go out there and be like, oh, there's something that's like really cute. I'm going to kill it. I don't know.
Yeah.
Maybe people are like that. I don't know. But so I'm just wondering, is there like a place in between? It's like the sort of localized hunting mentality. Is that an okay objectification of animals versus the sort of like large scale industrial objectification? Is there a different way to go about approaching this? I'm just sort of thinking through all of that.
So what I would offer up are a couple things, and ask McKenna these questions too. But I think there are various ways that you can hunt, and not all of them. You have to sort of see that animal as just meat. Try and objectify it so you don't. So there are certain indigenous groups who actually see animals that they hunt as brothers and sisters, or a different nation that are offering themselves up. And so there's like rituals and ceremonies that they do while killing that animal, respecting it, and then eating it.
Which works for people who have that sort of tradition that,
Yeah.
but it's like for those
But we
of us
don't.
who are-
The second thing I was going to offer up is that so I live in a very agricultural heavy place, lots of farms, small farms, lots of 4-H kids. So I don't know if okay. And so around a certain part of the year, there are lots of young kids who have shown that animal, and now they need to sell them. And a lot of them get butchered and killed. And so I have done this a couple times where I actually will go out, take my daughter with me, and we go and meet like a goat, little male goat. That's his name. Touch him. And then have him butchered. And then put him in the freezer and eat him. Right? And so, one of the things you might say is if you can't handle that, if you think that's gross, if it's damaging to your psyche, then stop eating meat, right? But I think it's possible, at least in certain places, and maybe again I'm privileged because I have this access to agricultural places like this and families who will let me look at the damn thing before they kill it, that you can't. Can you handle it? Can you stomach it? That's another question. And so I do think there is middle ground. I do think there are different ways we can do it. But I think that turning our backs and just leaving it to a blind thing that happens in an abattoir and you never do it and you don't want to see any fur ever, and it's just stuff underneath plastic wrap. I don't even want to see blood or bones, right? That sort of thing, that's damaging, and I think that allows us to eat it without any concern, without even wondering if it was alive or if it had a decent life or anything. Yes?
And just to follow up, I think there's something really interesting about also reflecting on your own body and reciprocity and things like that. So, like, am I willing to give myself back, after death or something like that?
Oh.
Would I be willing to participate in this in some way? what does respectful use look like from the other side? They're just interesting other questions to consider.
McKenna tells stories about Val Plumwood getting attacked by an alligator or crocodile, and changed her whole view on this thing because she was prey too.
Food.
Yeah.
Speaking of food, oh, go ahead, Sabrina, and then we'll speak of food.
I don't know, from a personal background, I can appreciate Natalie's comment about the issue of like meat versus a live being.
Yep.
And you're commenting that various cultural groups have ways of accommodating that transition, but my mother in her later life became a butcher for 3.5 decades, and I helped her process meat at Arnold's Market, which was very well known for its meat counter, just in the town. Their clothes is a business now. But there is a different mentality that you take on just processing meat versus that snap point of a live being going over to meat. Or similarly, I was trained as a medical anthropologist, and part of my colleagues' background dealt with skeletal biology, and either interacting with that profession in a forensic, medical, and police background, or in archaeological background. And nowadays we have NAGPRA laws that indicate, okay, you don't go digging up cemeteries all over the universe, whether it's a WASP cemetery or a native indigenous person cemetery, unless for some reason there's an actual interest in maybe preserving that for some reason. But there is nevertheless, that mental thing about a live being and one that isn't, and how you interact with it to understand its status in its life force.
Sure.
And the fact that you can't understand certain details without interacting with it. And so, we can't train up people to know how to age sex and figure out the pathologies of that forensic case, or the person in the cemetery, or however you want to preserve your relatives without interacting. And so there's that dilemma of what is ethical and what is just out of bounds.
So is the suggestion that we should train children to hang out with animals and see the animal production, or to see what animals are like before they eat them? Before they have any...
It would make people much more aware of where everything comes from and what its meaning is.
Yeah.
Because I don't know that for some people in a very industrial
You don't see
that
it.
it has much meaning.
Yeah, I think that's right.
I've got just one more comment, and it just kind of reflects on what you were saying before.
Sure.
I'm a member of the Lakota tribe, and as my husband has explained it to me, because he understands Lakota history better than I do, even though he's European. He just got better educated on it at the school where he attended. And, he tells the story that the Wakantanka gave the buffalo to the Lakota people as a source of sustenance, that it existed as both God and the source of life to them, and that that was an agreement, an understanding, is that not just a micro form of manifest destiny? And how are we to incorporate every indigenous belief system? You know, if I were to tell that story to a vegan and say, I'm trying to reconnect with my Lakota history, so I'm eating buffalo from now on, or bison, or whatever, you know, that's a way they could see it, is that it's actually just a less successful version of manifest destiny to say that the buffalo were given to me by my God. So I get to eat them for as long as I want.
Yeah, I'm leery of divine fiat sort of arguments. Right? God said so.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah,
If
that's
you
right.
observe all the indigenous history and culture and knowledge,
Gotcha.
it brings up, you know, lots of complications.
No, I was just offering that up, that I do know that there are other groups and other people, and the way they have interactions, the way they think about themselves, their ontology of the world, the other animal beings, it's different. And so we don't have to assume necessarily that we all come from this place with these sorts of ways of approaching other animals and the land.
It's a complicated topic.
Yeah.
I said it because I'm a member of the tribe, so I figure I'm allowed to say it, but nobody else has to comment on it. It just occurred to me now.
Speaking of tribes, the cat that comes and goes from here is a member of the cat tribe. It's not really a tribe because she's super independent. She's probably been thrown out of the cat tribe. But that said, she's a hell of a mouser. And in this house, that's necessary. And I'm now using the word necessary in a pointed way. It's necessary that those little replicas of Dorothy's shoes click together when you walk in here. It's necessary that that cat does what she does in this house, which is she takes down the mice in the way that the cats take down the mice. Is there a relationship between human and animal necessity? Simple question.
I would say it's, if there is, and I do think there is. It's
and
not,
your hawk story, by the way, it's all about
it's not in some sort of rudimentary, like it's hardwired into either us, the land, or that other animal. These are projects that human beings have to keep houses like this and keep them mice free, to make sure that your door is closed. These are things humans have created, and yes, our pets and our creatures that live with us help us to live lifestyles, certain types of lifestyles. I don't think it's necessary that we live those particular types of lifestyles.
Those hawks aren't your pets, though.
No.
This is the line I've been trying to push.
I think we need to talk more about this, because I'm not getting it.
You need to tell you those mice are Europeans. And the cats are from North Africa.
This is kind of to your hawk story. Here comes the pizza gas.
Speaking of food, but
Yes, we let and encourage the cat to catch the mice. The mice who have adapted to know, and I'm not going to use the right philosophical terminology,
Gotcha.
but the mice who have adapted to know that if they come in this house instead of staying out there in the yard, they're probably going to find something easier to eat or whatever. And so we allow the cat to prey on the mice who have chosen to come into the house. But it makes me feel better that, I mean, even if the cat maybe tortures this little critter, that is a natural way of this relationship. And it makes me feel better that I'm not using some human-developed device to torture this little mouse to rid my house of it. So I use it to make myself feel better, to allow a more natural way of pest control.
Yeah, I mean, I think it gets even more complicated if you start to talk about, like, you're a miller and you have to protect your flour, your grains, or Yeah, the sheepdogs that help to keep the sheep in line and keep them safe. There are mutual sort of things that between in farming lives particularly that where these animals become integral parts of farms. And so if you want to live that agrarian lifestyle, animal products, manure, the force that you can get out of a horse or an ox becomes very, very important and integral to that style of life. Now, I think that was the question, do we have to live those type of lives? And I don't think you have to. Would human beings be as sort of prolific? I don't think so.
We could forage.
Yeah,
We
we could.
did for a very long
I
time.
know.
about a million years.
I know. I mean, yeah.
I like the idea though of introducing creatures that exist together in that way. We were getting a lot of camel crickets in our old house a while back, and Benjamin and I joked, let's just get some lizards.
Yeah.
Let's just set some lizards free in the house, and there goes the cricket problem.
I was just reading something about geckos in Hawaii, and the
Yeah.
people they love them apparently because they eat roaches and all these different insects.
Yeah, there's a way to deal with that.
Although history is replete with that kind of approach that has been anything ecological disaster. You're aware of that, right? I was going down.
Yeah.
I've heard those stories of trying to control quote unquote pests with other introduced species. And
Yeah.
There's been a lot of disasters. So.
Well, we'll find something to eat the lizards when that
Well,
time
let
comes.
us turn
Until
it
there's
out.
something we can eat,
Right.
Domesticated them. Sorry.
Lee, you want to know how when your talk is over is really measured?
How's that?
It's when the pizza.
Thank you.
Everybody,
Thank you.